Today I'd like to do a gear strategy video on prepping systems that I like to call complementary redundancy. And this is a concept that I've been trying to apply to my various prepping kits for the past few years now. This is due to gear purchase frustrations when buying the same item multiple times to use in multiple kits. There are multiple prepping gear categories such as comms, illuminations, fire, and so on, and individual item types for each one of those categories. For example, a flashlight. And one problem that I've had over the past few years is finding a flashlight that I really like and wanting to include it in multiple kits. For example, including it in my EDC, in my get home bag, in my bug out bag, in my home preps, and just buying that item multiple times. The words complementary and redundancy are oftentimes oxymorons. Also, there's a fine line between prepping and hoarding, and I definitely don't want to trend toward the hoarding portion of that fine line. So I personally try to make a great emphasis on system organization and smart purchase decisions. Before going into the details of this topic, let's quickly go over the definitions of complementary and redundancy. Redundancy is a common term used in the prepping community. Oftentimes people take it to the extreme where they include 5 EDC knives on them and have another 5 knives in their bug out bag, for example, for a total of 10 knives. Maybe that's a little bit too much on the redundancy side. Let's start off first with redundancy. So redundancy is the state of not or no longer being needed or useful. I work in software engineering, so in engineering, that means the inclusion of extra components that are not strictly necessary to functioning in case of failure in other components. And then in the Webster's Dictionary, redundancy, closely related to redound, has stayed close to the original meaning of overflow or more than necessary. Avoiding redundancy is one of the prime rules of good writing. Data redundancy means keeping the same computer data in more than one place as a safety measure, and as a backup system in an airplane may provide redundancy, again for the sake of safety. That fits really well on the whole concept of prepping. You don't want to just have one of a particular item. For example, you don't only want to have one flashlight, because if that flashlight breaks, you'll no longer have any kind of illumination. So you want to have some level of redundancy. Now moving on to complementary. So complementary is combining in such a way as to enhance or emphasize the qualities of each other or another. That stems from the word complement, which means something that completes something else or makes it better. So my frustrations with gear purchases in the prepping world is just having redundancy without having it be complementary redundancy. After all, do you really need to have 3 of the exact same multi-tool for multiple kits? Or would it be better to have one multi-tool and then have other tools that complement that multi-tool? Let's go through an example of what I refer to as complementary redundancy. I have an EDC, or everyday carry, of items that I store on my person for everyday use. For example, I may have a flashlight in my pants pocket. That's my EDC flashlight. When I'm wearing a jacket, I may be able to store a larger flashlight with me, maybe a pen style flashlight. Maybe both of those flashlights have a certain amount of throw to them. They're throwing flashlights versus one being throw and one being more of a flood flashlight. I also have an EDC backpack or EDC bag that might have an additional flashlight in there. On top of that, I may have a get home bag or a bug out bag that has a larger flashlight that's more intended to be used for a bug out bag. And then in my home preps, I may have an even larger flashlight. Again, all of those flashlights are just throwing light. So is it really good to have redundancy of having the same flashlight for multiple kits? I don't have multiple hands. I have 2 hands, so I could probably carry 2 flashlights. But would it be better to have complementary redundancy where it's more on the topic of having items of illumination that could complement each other? For example, in my EDC pants pocket flashlight, maybe I have a thrower of a flashlight. In my jacket pocket, maybe I have one that's more of a floody flashlight that has a magnetic base to it, so I could use it for emergency auto repair, for example. And then in my EDC backpack, instead of having an additional flashlight, which I'd have to carry, and I already have a flashlight on me, maybe it'd be better to have a headlamp, for example, that I could have on my head and still be able to use my flashlight. So those 2 items complement each other. And then if we're moving on, maybe with the bug out bag or even with the home preps, maybe it would be better for me to purchase a lantern, for example, instead of another flashlight or another headlamp. So then I could use that lantern as some sort of illumination that complements the other items of illumination that I already have. So I already have my EDC flashlight, I already have a headlamp as part of my EDC bag, or maybe even a bug out bag, and I also have a lantern. So all of those items are illumination items. They all complement each other, and they also provide some level of redundancy. And that's what I refer to as complementary redundancy. I think it's easier to find two items that offer some level of redundancy than it is to find two items that complement each other. For example, with flashlights, it's a little easier. You may have a handheld flashlight that has some throw to it, and then you may have a headlamp that could attach to your head. You could still carry your flashlight, and maybe the headlamp, for example, could be more of a floody illumination method and your flashlight more of a throwing method. So I consider complementary redundancy to apply to two or more items. For me, the holy trinity of complementary redundancy is to find a system of three items that all work with each other. For example, a flashlight, a headlamp, and a lantern. They could all work with each other. You could carry all of them, and they would all apply to some level of illumination. There are times where just redundancy is preferred. For example, with water storage, maybe even data backups, there's not a whole bunch of different types of water, for example, that could complement each other. But you still may be able to apply the concept of complementary redundancy with some of those things. For example, with water storage, maybe you could have different size containers for the water storage, where you have a 5-gallon water jug, maybe even have some individual 20-ounce jugs of water, and then maybe have some canned or box water where they all kind of complement each other depending on what their use case would be. So you can apply it in that way. So also with the data storage, maybe you'll have some data stored on an external hard drive, and then other data, the same data for redundancy purposes, stored on a USB flash drive, and then the additional data stored on a micro SD card. But again, those trend more towards just plain old redundancy than complementary redundancy. Now, this does require me to be a little bit more diligent with regard to that base layer item. For example, an EDC multi-tool. If your items of complementary redundancy don't directly replace the primary functionality of the initial items, you just can't have some crappy initial item and then have complementary redundancy over a crappy item. So the initial baseline item does have to be quality. So what I'd like to do now is get the comment section going and ask you, the YouTube audience, on what are some other examples of complementary redundancy for gear between different prepping systems. For example, you may have your EDC, what you carry on your person, then your EDC bag, EDC backpack, maybe your go bag, and then after that, maybe your bug out bag, get home bag, the items in your vehicle preps, for example, and then moving on to your home preps. What are some other categories of items that could be considered complementary redundancy? For example, with tools or with knife, maybe you'll have a small EDC blade and then a larger blade for your EDC bag, and then a fixed blade, for example, with your bug out bag. And would that be either redundancy or complementary redundancy? Ideally, you want to have two or more items that complement each other, aren't just redundant, but actually improve the overall system of that particular category of items. So leave your ideas for complementary redundancy in the comment section below of this video. I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this video featuring the concept of complementary redundancy. Again, leave your comments below in the comment section regarding this topic. So this has been something that I've been applying when I'm making purchase decisions for the various gear of my various prepping systems and kits. I have a lot of different projects going, various kits for myself, my EDC bag, bug out bag, home preps for my family members, for other projects, and I got tired of just buying the same favorite flashlight or the same favorite knife for all of those kits. So I've been trying to be a little bit smarter with my purchase decisions and trying to find items and categories of items that complement each other in addition to providing some level of redundancy. So I'm really curious to hear what you guys think regarding this topic, and if you could find some similar patterns with other categories of gear. So again, leave your comments below in the comment section, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.